What's up, guys? Derek, moreplates.com. Today I'm going to be talking quickly about how to distinguish if you have androgenic alopecia or telogen effluvium or acute telogen effluvium. So what you may or may not know, if you've seen some of my previous videos on hair loss, there's a difference between follicular miniaturization triggered by androgens and shedding triggered by nutritional deficiencies, hormonal fluctuations, environmental stressors, toxins, allergens, what have you. Things that can cause fluctuation in your body and basically force your hair into the shedding phase quicker than it otherwise normally would be. Things like hypothyroidism, things like radiation therapy. There's a lot of stuff that can cause shedding that's not necessarily androgenic alopecia is facilitated via androgens in your body, causing this cascade of events that ultimately leads to the miniaturization of hair follicles and, this systemic, or I should say concentrated hypoxia essentially of the follicle and, not killing it off permanently. But there's a big difference between something being miniaturized and something just being forced to shed out of your head. So the distinguishing way you can do this is actually a good study to reference. It's the title of the study is Distinguishing Androgenic Alopecia from Chronic Telogen Effluvium when Associated in the Same Patient. So basically how this is evaluated is when you look at a hair, when you shed a hair and you pull a hair out of your head, or you look at your shower drain or whatever, which I recommend you guys do, get a shower drain or a hair catcher, I should say, to gauge your progress, because evaluating if a treatment is efficacious or not for you in particular, and kind of where your baseline shedding levels are at before and after you start treatments, or when you change things or add things in and out, it's good to assess your shedding and how much hair is falling into your head in general. So the thing is a hair, in terms of determining if it's miniaturized or not, it more or less breaks down to the length of the hair. So hairs that are 5 centimeters or longer are considered healthy, non-miniaturized hairs, at least in this standard in this clinical setting. Hairs that are shorter than 3 centimeters or shorter are considered miniaturized hairs. So if you have, let's say you lose 100 hairs in the shower, and on any standard day, losing 100 hairs is normal. Even if you don't have androgenic alopecia, losing 100 hairs per day is normal. So determining if these hairs are miniaturized or not, all you have to do is check the length, essentially. If less than 10% of them are less than 3 centimeters, then you can conclude that you aren't experiencing at least significant androgenic alopecia. Any amount, if over 10% of the hairs that fall out of your head are miniaturized and 3 centimeters or less, then you can conclude that, according to this study, that you are experiencing androgenic alopecia, and those hairs are indeed, miniaturized, and hence why they aren't growing to full length, kind of thing. So obviously this is a very crude way of assessing, and I think it's safer to assume that if you're a male, you're likely experiencing androgenic alopecia regardless. But just as far as a reference point, there are individuals who do have chronic telogen effluvium, and most of them are girls, to be honest. When it comes to guys, the likelihood is that you're experiencing androgenic alopecia. But it's still interesting nonetheless to assess if you're having a massive shed. If you're shedding more than 100 hairs per day, if you have a shower and 500 hairs come out or something, you might be experiencing telogen effluvium, or perhaps a combination of androgenic alopecia with telogen effluvium. So basically the standard by which they go with is any patient that shed 200 hairs or more, they classify as having chronic telogen effluvium. The percentage where the threshold would be to also classify as androgenic alopecia would be if 10% or more of these hairs were miniaturized and 3 centimeters or shorter. So that's essentially all the study breaks down to, is they look at a bunch of participants and they look at, 100 consecutive patients with hair loss who were clinically diagnosed as having chronic telogen effluvium, androgenic alopecia, or androgenic alopecia and chronic telogen effluvium concurrently, or remitting chronic telogen effluvium. Patients washed their hair in the sink in a standardized way. All shed hairs were counted and divided blindly into 5 centimeters or longer, intermediate length 3 centimeters, greater than 3 centimeters or less than 5 centimeters, and 3 centimeters or shorter. The latter were considered telogen vellus hairs, and patients having at least 10% of them were classified as having AGA. So this would be like a miniaturized hair that hasn't grown to full maturity, essentially, and that's why it's falling out of your head before it's grown more than 3 centimeters, essentially, at least by the standard. We assumed that patients shedding 200 hairs or more had chronic telogen effluvium. The case statistic revealed, however, that the best concordance between clinical and numerical diagnosis was obtained by setting the cutoff shedding value at 100 hairs or more. So of the 100 patients, 18 with 10% or more hairs that were 3 centimeters or shorter had, and who shed fewer than 100 hairs were diagnosed as having androgenic alopecia. 34 with fewer than 10% hairs that were 3 centimeters or shorter, and who shed at least 100 hairs were diagnosed as having chronic telogen effluvium. 34 with 10% or more of hairs that were 3 centimeters or shorter, and who shed at least 100 hairs were diagnosed as having androgenic alopecia and chronic telogen effluvium. And 14 with fewer than 10% of hairs that were 3 centimeters or shorter, and who shed fewer than 100 hairs were diagnosed as having chronic telogen effluvium in remission. So the conclusion is the method is simple, non-invasive, and suitable for office evaluation. So, in an expert opinion, if you go shake your head into your sink and you can get 100 hairs to fall into the sink, over 100 hairs, then you're experiencing chronic telogen effluvium and you're shedding more than you should otherwise if you had everything, all your ducks in a row in terms of whatever kind of things could cause temporary shedding or chronic telogen effluvium. Of the hairs that fall out, if 10% or greater are less than 3 centimeters, then you're also experiencing androgenic alopecia. So if you want to go do this, it's interesting. I don't think it's 100% indicative of what's actually going on. Like I said, if you're a male, it's safer to say that you very likely are experiencing androgenic alopecia at some degree, depending on endogenous androgen production, AR sensitivity, AR density, numerous other factors, but interesting nonetheless. So take from that what you will. Thank you guys for watching. Please like, subscribe. If you want to see the link to the studies that I reference in my videos, subscribe to the newsletter, moreplatesmoredates.com, and I email out the full article every time they get published, along with the corresponding clinical studies that I'm referencing. It's way more organized than these videos that are basically just me talking off the cuff. Check out Instagram at moreplates_moredates, Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, podcast, video description below if you want audio format of these videos and my articles. If you guys want to check out some of the stuff I'm affiliated with, like Gorilla Mind, I highly recommend you try that. It's my turnkey nootropic formula. Some other stuff, obviously getting your blood work. I have a link in the video description where you can get that done, which is super important for evaluating your sex hormones when it comes to hair loss management and just determining your overall health status, as well as fast-drying non-greasy minoxidil. This is like the only minoxidil liquid that I've seen that doesn't make your hair look like garbage, and the best ketoconazole shampoo as well. I linked in the video description below. So if you guys want to check that out, link in the description below. Thank you guys for watching. Talk to you soon.